Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Freedom Factor. So, yesterday was quite a historic day. Artemis 2 launched on their mission to fly to the moon and back in preparation for future missions to eventually land on the moon. Now, this is a feat that hasn't been accomplished since 1972 with Apollo 17, which was the last time we had astronauts set foot on the lunar surface. Quite a monumental day. But if you were to go onto social media, you would be absolutely inundated with claims that we never went to the moon in the first place.
Do you know how stupid that sounds?
Now, I enjoy a good conspiracy theory as much as the next person, and I'm certainly not one to, quote, trust the official narrative every time I'm told something. For instance, I don't believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole gunman that killed JFK. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was 100% a false flag to drag us further into the conflict in Vietnam. The attack on the USS Liberty in 1967 was absolutely not a mistake or an accident, as they claim. Homemade cloth masks and 6 foot distancing did nothing to mitigate the COVID-19 pandemic, and Saddam Hussein was not on his way to obtaining a nuclear weapon. The official narrative has rarely, if ever, been 100% truthful. But the problem with many theories that indicate some broader conspiracy is that a lot of them, when they get a little too far outside the bounds of rationality, begin to fall apart under logical scrutiny. Which brings us to the issue of moon landing denial. Now, there are 3 main aspects I want to cover when it comes to this, and it involves 3 distinct concepts. First, physical evidence. Second, the foreign perspective. And third, logical scrutiny. So, let's get into it. First off, the physical evidence. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details about the mountains of evidence supporting all of the all the physical aspects of it. That would take hours, and I really don't have the time, and I'm sure you don't want to spend the time listening. So I will kind of keep it brief. This one kind of also ties into the second point, but we're going to first cover just the broad strokes of this. So there were 7 missions, 6 of which landed on the moon. 7 intended. Of course, the 7th being unsuccessful, which was Apollo 13, which by now, I'm hopeful everybody's seen the movie with Tom Hanks that details this.
Houston, we have a problem.
So I feel I don't need to go into that. Now, each landing left stuff behind. Apollo 15 utilized the moon rover, which is still there. Apollo 11, 14, and 15 all placed retroreflectors on the moon's surface. These can be used to determine range using laser equipment, which is not exclusive to governments. If you have the equipment necessary, you can actually conduct this experiment yourself. I mean, kind of. It's expensive and technical, but there's no legal barrier to utilizing this technology, and there are several laboratories and observatories outside of government control that have these tools and have used them. You can shoot a laser at this reflector on the moon, and it will come back, and it will tell you how far. I mean, I think it's some of the accuracy is up to the centimeter, how far away the moon is. This is something you can't just guesswork. This is something that actually happens. And so, the NASA missions left a ton of stuff up there, which kind of brings in the second point. Foreign governments have seen this stuff. China, Japan, Russia, India, South Korea all have imagery of various landing sites on the lunar surface. There are dozens and dozens of images from entities outside the US government, not to mention all the private astronomers that have no ties to the US government that utilize equipment to view the moon and have independently verified that these objects from the landings are in fact on the surface of the moon as we speak. Then there's the bigger issue from the foreign angle. 1969, which is the year of Apollo 11, the first landing on the moon. The US and Russia were still engaged, very much so, in the Cold War, and the space race was very much going on. And Russia had already beat the US in putting a satellite into space and manned spaceflight. But in the end, The entire space race culminated in the United States successfully conducting a manned mission to the moon, Apollo 11, where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were the first human beings to set foot on the moon. Russia said nothing to dispute this. And that would have been a huge win in the Cold War if they had any indication that we didn't actually land there. No such denial exists. This alone, I think, is one of the most important pieces of evidence that debunks deniers' claims. You really mean to tell me that the Soviet Union was just sitting there about to lose the space race and cede to the United States that we landed on the moon, and if it was fake, they said nothing?
Really?
Then we have to get to the logical inconsistencies that surround a lot of these really broad conspiracy theories. I've said this about 9/11 before. I'm not saying I trust the quote-unquote official narrative entirely, but then sometimes the skeptics' claims fall apart when you take into account the number of conspirators that would need to be involved. Now, I'm not here to litigate the 9/11 conspiracies, so we're not going to go there. But I will say, with respect to the Apollo program, I don't think the deniers understand just how many people would have to be involved to maintain their silence for this wild theory to logically work. The Apollo program was not just NASA. There are literal rocket scientists who did the math on various launch vehicles, and then there's all the workers who built these vehicles, tested them within the parameters of putting a payload not only into space, but also conducting the translunar injection burn, and carrying the vehicle the vast distance needed to enter lunar orbit, land, and then also get back up to the orbiter and back to Earth. And then you have the astronauts themselves. Buzz Aldrin literally punched a dude out for claiming that he was lying. So, I mean, that's pretty committed if it's all fake. You have hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals, not to mention all the independent observers who tracked most of the missions from various points on Earth, that would need to have maintained their silence for the last 50 years. The logic completely falls apart because anybody who knows anything about secrets knows the more people in on the secret, the harder it is to keep secret. And thus far, there has not been a single whistleblower from all of the organizations involved: NASA, Boeing, Douglas Aircraft Corporation, Grumman Space Engineering, Raytheon, Aerojet, Rocketdyne, or North American Aviation. All of the independent companies involved in the construction of the various parts of the Apollo program, and not one person has ever come out to say it was fake. So, what does this mean? Basically, to maintain the belief that the entire Apollo program was a farce takes a level of willful ignorance that is on par with those who maintain the belief that the world is flat. I'm serious. I equate moon landing deniers to flat earthers. It involves ignoring so much data and so much evidence. I really can't understand how these people can maintain this. And this is not meant as a disrespect to these people. It's not meant to belittle them. It's not meant to say that they're stupid, even though some of the things they're saying isn't really logical or intellectually honest. And it's like, you watch a couple of kooky conspiratorial documentaries and think that it's somehow evidentiary that we never went to the moon, when we literally spent billions to do this. You mean to tell me we spent all that money to fake this? And that we spent all this time and effort building these giant rockets? I mean, we're talking the Saturn V is humongous. It's giant. Just to give you an idea, the Saturn V rocket that launched Apollo 11 is 363 feet tall, 33 feet in diameter, and it weighed 6 million pounds. You mean to tell me that people built something that large, that massive, and then fired it into space for nothing? What, to keep up a lie? I don't understand how people can still maintain this position that it's not real. And it really does. It blows my mind because there is so much evidence. And I mean, just look at it logically. Do you think that Russia and China, two of our adversaries, would sit here all this time and say, yep, that happened, when this would be the biggest win on the global stage in terms of like psychological operations or propaganda purposes? China's launched vehicles to the moon, and they've photographed the entire moon with a satellite. They've seen the launch sites. I've put pictures up. They've seen the launch site, or the landing sites. You mean to tell me that they're going to sit there and go, no, that was all fake? No, none of them have said that. And the amount of win that they would get in this, I mean, the Soviet Union could have been like, the Americans never went to the moon. And it would have been headlines across the globe. Yet they never denied it. And in fact, to add on to that, after we landed on the moon, the Soviet Union abandoned their space program because they were like, no, the Americans beat us. No one else, no other country did it. And then we'll get into the logical inconsistency surrounding this whole, we haven't been back. Why haven't we been back? We lost the technology apparently, or that. No, to attack this particular argument is laughable because it fails to understand. In 1969, when Apollo 11 launched and landed on the moon on July 16th, 1969, Apollo 11 launched. There were 350 million people who watched it. Correction, 360. Sorry, 360 million people watched it. 3 years later, just 3 short years later, Apollo 17, in December of 1972, Apollo 17 was the last space mission of the Apollo program to put astronauts on the moon. There were 17 million viewers. That is a 97% drop in viewership. At that point, in just 3 years, people lost interest. They said, okay, we're done. Yeah, we landed on the moon. Whoop-de-doo. Okay, moving on. It became so expensive and so... They basically said, all right, we're done. You know, like, we've done it. We've landed people on the moon. Cool. All right. And then the mission focus shifted. And then we went to the space shuttle, where we entered operations that were conducted in low Earth orbit. You know, there were scientific experiments and space telescope experiments, satellite maintenance, launch, and recovery operations. All of this took place within this sphere of influence that constitutes low Earth orbit. And we didn't have a vehicle to go to the moon anymore because the Apollo program was finished. They were like, all right, we're done. And so we stopped building vehicles to do this. It comes into mission specificity. What are your goals and what are you trying to accomplish with your mission? And the mission was no longer going to the moon because they had viewed it as, okay, people don't care about the moon anymore. And of course, you know, the big thing that people were excited for and watched was the shuttle launches. And everybody watched the shuttle launches, and the shuttle was really cool. We had a couple of accidents, namely the Challenger and Columbia disasters. But on the whole, the mission was the shuttle. The shuttle was designed to be this reusable vehicle to go into low Earth orbit, conduct experiments, conduct space missions, dealing with satellites and things like that, and doing science in space, and studying the effects of microgravity on the human body and things like that. That was the mission. So when the mission shifts, of course you're not going to go, you know, the space shuttle can't land on the moon. So we weren't going to do moon missions anymore. That was no longer the priority. It was no longer the target. Now With the Artemis program, the mission is the moon, and we are doing it. And it's happening. And it's not because we lost the technology. No, we're talking about a difference in 50 years of technology where the computers on board the command module for the Apollo program are 200 times less powerful than the cell phone that you carry around in your pocket today. So, of course, the technology is going to be different. And we are using that technology to now go onto a different mission set, which is aiming for the moon. It's not that we didn't do it and now we can't replicate it. No, we can. We just have to dedicate the technology and the industry to that specific goal, that specific mission set. So the fact that that argument is just ridiculous and dumb. I'm not saying the people are dumb. I'm saying the argument is dumb. So really, to kind of summarize this, the amount of just information you would have to just completely discredit and disregard from basically any form of consideration it's just enormous. You'd literally have to ignore glaring signs right in front of your face. And honestly, like at this point, I can't fathom how people can logically make that leap to saying we never did this when there is so much evidence and so much information available in 2026 that you can actually verify this independently. Like there's no government control saying you can't look into this. And to say it's all some big conspiracy is just, I think it's laughable at best. And at worst, I think either some people are just so committed to this conspiracy narrative that they're willing to ignore all the evidence, or, and this is kind of more, a smaller number, there's a malicious intent. And there are people who just are so anti-whatever that they have to just say, no, I'm not going to believe anything the government says, no matter what, ever, ever, ever. And it's like, look, I don't believe a lot of what the government says. However, on this, it's like, you have to look at it kind of like this, keep it on the space theme. I'll use a really silly analogy. Look at it like the solar system. The government is kind of like the solar system. You got the inner planets, which is like, the main government itself, like the executive, the core of the executive branch, the legislature, and then all the various agencies there in the hub of it, like, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, DHS, etc. All these are kind of like the inner planets. And then you go further out, the further detached from like the core of the government, and further out you get these agencies that aren't as, in terms of like, nefarious. Like on the furthest edges, I would say you have organizations or agencies in the government, like out at like Jupiter, you have things like the FAA. They're still attached to the government. They're still kind of, but they're not terribly overbearing like the IRS or the NSA. And then you go further out into the outer reaches, like the Oort cloud, or I guess you could say like Neptune. And you've got organizations like NASA, which really is not like, I mean, it's a government agency, but it's not like the core government where they're like, it's not like a cartoon villain. So they're related to the government, but they're way out here. Or the NTSB, where the NTSB, they don't even make policy. They do recommendations. That's all they do. They investigate and they submit recommendations. They don't even really write policy like the federal government, like the core of the federal government. So these guys are out on the periphery. And so they're not really like these evil, nefarious groups out here part of the government. They're more kind of, they're attached to the government, but they've got their own thing going on. And that's where I view this. And so the whole conspiracy and denial of the moon landing, I think, is really just, it's either willful ignorance, which I think is a large portion, or people who just don't know what they don't know, and that, whatever. And then there's the malicious types. And then there's the people who are just trying to belong to something. And I really think there's quite a few people there in that category where it's like, you don't fully commit to it, but you just want to belong. You want to belong to something that's kind of counterculture, counter narrative, that's kind of cool, like, edgy. And I think a lot of people do that. But in terms of the rest, I think it's just, people are subjected to so many varied opinions and propaganda out there that it's really hard to kind of, move away from it. Like that, the people that believe that the earth is flat, like there's literal I mean, I can prove it right now that the earth is not flat. Go get in an airplane and turn on a radio receiver in the airplane. There's these things called VORs. It uses radio signals. You can plug in. I mean, it's published on every aeronautical chart known to man. You look at a VOR, punch in that radio frequency, and it sends out a signal. Fly far enough over the horizon, that signal stops because you can there's no longer line of sight. And you can ask anybody who does radios. There's this thing called line of sight. You need line of sight. I mean, best example of it is the scene with Jeff Goldblum in Independence Day, where a satellite on one side of the planet can't talk to a satellite on the polar opposite side of the planet. You need to bounce that signal off of repeater satellites. It's the same concept. So that right there can prove that the earth is not flat. Like, I have flown in an airplane and have tested this, where I've lost signal with a VOR transmitter. And so, I've lost signal with a tower, a literal tower at an airport. I've lost that signal. Like, you cannot pick up that signal if you're far enough away because of over the horizon communications. It's a simple concept. So, bottom line, it's not an insult to the people who don't believe it, but the fact that there are people here who still don't believe it, I think it's proof that, either some people choose not to, or some people just don't understand, and they don't have the desire to pursue that knowledge, to figure it out. They're like, nope, I've looked into it as far as I want to look into it, and this is what I believe. And to those people, I'm sorry. I unfortunately can't empathize with you. I can't really quite understand how it is and why it is you believe that you believe, but I can't help you there. So anyway, just wanted to do that. There's a lot going on, and I figured, yesterday was something positive. I'm really happy that we finally had a historic moment that wasn't negative. I am so tired of living through these huge historical moments. I mean, we've gone through so many. 9/11 and COVID-19 and Donald Trump getting elected to president and war in Iran. I mean, it's just like it seems like nowadays every 2 years we hit like a giant moment in history, like this giant just tower of history. And finally we have one with the Artemis program that is something positive, that isn't people dying or horrible incidents. It's a pivotal moment in history. It's a page in a history book one day that's actually something positive. And if you can't get excited for that, I mean, I don't know what's wrong with you. I think it's cool. I get it. I nerd out on this stuff, but I think it's really something special. I thought it was a really cool experience to sit and watch the Artemis 2 launch with my daughter last night and say, these guys are flying further than any human has ever flown from this Earth. They're going to go fly around the moon and come back. And I think that's pretty cool, to be perfectly honest with you. So, anywho, that's all I got for today. Thanks for tuning in. It helps the channel out if you like, subscribe, share this around. If, again, as I always do, if you're going to comment, please keep it respectful. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anybody else. I'm not trying to say that these deniers are stupid. I just think that the denial itself is kind of dumb. Not the person, but the idea. So anyway, hope you all have a great weekend, and I will catch you guys on the next one.